Great Tuesday afternoon to you guys. Got a great show for you guys today. Welcome to the Seth Joyner Show. Michael Wilbon is going to be my guest today. He'll be joining me the second half of the show. So much going on in the world of sports. My goodness, especially the football over the weekend was just epic. My goodness, how about that Chiefs Browns game? Tom Brady finally getting it done versus the New Orleans Saints. You couldn't ask for a better weekend than this past weekend, just being glued to the tube and watching TV. And, quite naturally, we're wondering what these Philadelphia Eagles are going to be doing at the head coaching spot. And, like I said, Michael Wilbon is going to come on and join me a little later on. But let's get into some Eagle stuff. You guys know I've talked about it, going into this year. What I'm going to start doing with the show is, we're going to, pare back some of the Eagle stuff. I will always talk Eagles, but I'm going to broaden the scope and talk more NFL, this off season and leading into next year's season. I just think, that it is the thing to do. Always got love for my Philly fans. Always got love, for the Philadelphia Eagles, and we can talk about that. But I think that the show will be better, a much broader show, if we can expand upon it and talk a little more total NFL. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But, hey, I even got some time to take some questions today. But the biggest thing I want to know, and you guys, kind of participate and let me know what you're thinking. What is going on with this coaching search for the Philadelphia Eagles? I think seven teams are in need of a head coach at the end of this season. And at this point in time, the Philadelphia Eagles and the Houston Texans are the only two teams that's left searching for a head coach. Now, I find it odd. Very, very odd. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a team interview so many people. But the Eagles they've interviewed 12 different candidates so far. Arthur Smith, already hired. Dennis Allen, Deuce Staley, Gerard Mayo, Joe Brady, Josh McDaniels, who from, what I understand is going to be right now is the front runner. Kellen Moore. Nick Sirianni, Robert Sella, already hired, and Todd Bowles. That's 12 guys, 12 that the Eagles have already interviewed, okay? On the radar, they got seven more. So they've got Brandon Staley. He's off the market, just signed today by the LA Chargers. You've got Brian Daboll, who they can't talk to right now, and Eric Bieniemy, who they can't talk to right now because it's still in the playoffs. You got John Fossil, special teams coach, and then you got Lincoln Riley, Luke Fickell, and Ryan Day, three college coaches. So the Eagles have got 19 potential head coaching candidates in the pipeline from the time that Doug Peterson is gone to the present time. And here we are, 3 weeks removed, and 5 other teams have already got their issue resolved, and the Eagles are still trying to figure it out. So my thing is, hey, throw me some questions, and let's try to navigate this and try to understand what the problem is. What's taking so long? Why haven't the Eagles made a decision? I've got my thoughts as to why, they haven't hired someone yet. I'm really interested to hear from you guys and kind of get an idea of, what you guys think. I see in the questions down here, Eric Bieniemy, the head coach. Someone said hire, McDaniels. Someone said, hey, hire, Kellen Moore. I'm not in favor of that hire. But, someone saying, Sam is saying, with this front office, patience is our ally. I'm trying to understand, how is that? How is patience our ally. Let me remind you guys, okay, when Chip Kelly was fired, the Eagles kind of went through this same scenario. They interviewed a lot of potential clients, a lot of guys that got jobs, that at this point in time have already been fired and moved on from, guys like Adam Gase. But you've also had guys that have had success. And my problem with the hiring process, after Chip Kelly was it's not just a head coach that you're hiring. You're hiring position coaches and you're hiring coordinators. And the problem is the longer you wait, the smaller the pool gets of qualified coaches that can come on board and be coordinators on both sides of the ball and position coaches. This is the problem that I also see, with the NFL's rule that as long as a guy is continued to be in the playoffs, that you have to wait until they get knocked out or they win the whole deal. Because all of these valuable coaches are being snatched up across the board, and it minimizes your ability to build the type of coaching staff that's necessary for you to be and have success down the road. So I'm not a big fan of being patient. My other theory is, like I was saying, when Doug Peterson was hired, Howie Roseman had already hired Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator. No one really knew, we just thought that, Doug Peterson was another one of Andy's guys that, he just really wanted to take a look at. But I think by the time they made the decision to hire Doug Peterson as the head coach, he was really all that was left on the board. There was no one else left for the Philadelphia Eagles for the most part, besides a guy like Doug Peterson. And what did Doug Peterson bring? Doug Peterson brought Jeffrey Lurie the ease of knowing that Doug would do and handle being the head coach along the same lines as Andy Reid did. So there was that familiarity there. There was that comfort there, that knowing that, okay, I may not have Andy Reid anymore, but I've got a process that I know is going to operate just like Andy Reid. What did it provide for Howie Roseman? It provided him a first-time head coach who would not circumvent the power structure that he now had back in his grasp. That same power structure, in my opinion, that lent itself to the dismissal of Doug Peterson ultimately. So as I continue to watch this, I'm thinking the longer that the Eagles wait, the weaker, in my opinion, the weaker the pool gets, the weaker head coach you wind up getting. And invariably, the weaker staff you wind up being able to put together, because every single time that a head coach gets hired, that's one more offensive coordinator off the board. That's one more defensive coordinator off the board. That's a whole positional staff on the offense that's off the board, and defense that's off the board, and quality control people, so on and so forth. So how do you continue to build your staff over time if you continue to wait and you continue, to have this mindset that you're going to be patient? Eagle Sixers fan, he says, I'm glad that the 49ers promoted DeMeco Ryans. Hey, listen, if guys can get promoted and the guys can move up, hey, more power to them. Especially guys who have formerly played in the game. I love seeing that. I love seeing guys, who used to play, be able to step into that role now as defensive coordinators. Because, listen, you don't have to have played in the NFL to actually be a coach. I get that. But I think that I believe that there's some cachet to having played in the game. I think that there's some things that you bring to the table as an ex-player, the way that you can relate to players. Because, listen, at the end of the day, you're not going to hire a plumber to come in if you got a roofing problem, So why not hire someone who's been there and done that? Someone that can actually, speak to the player at their level because they've actually been there. Adam on board. He wants to know, did you play under Wade Phillips? What do you think of him as a head coach or defensive coordinator? Hey, listen, I cut my teeth in the NFL my first 2 years under Wade Phillips. Phenomenal trainer, phenomenal coach, phenomenal developer of skill sets. He's had his opportunities as a head coach. I don't think that there's too many organizations that are going to say, hey, let's bring this guy in. At his age is a deterrent for a lot of these owners now, because I think Wade is a little over 70-something years old. I think that teams look at that and say, maybe not as a head coach, and I might not be in favor of it as a head coach, but I would certainly love to see him come in and, be a defense coordinator. One thing I know, that guy can coordinate defense. He can put a defensive, scheme together. There's no doubt about it. I'm really, sad that, he hasn't had an opportunity to actually get back in the game. I tweeted at him earlier this week. He said, hey, I'm ready to get back into it, ready to unretire. And let me tell you something. Sometimes coaches get pushed out. In LA last year with the Rams, I feel like he was kind of pushed out of the situation. And really what wound up happening, you can go somewhere in a less than desirable position and be a defense coordinator, or you can just ride it out, understanding that an organization still owes you for another year and wait and see how things kind of play themselves out the following year. And I think that's exactly what it is that he did. Now he's ready to get back into the game and, not sure what the circumstances and what the situation is, why someone hasn't talked to him. Why hasn't he been on someone's radar to actually be a head coach, a defense coordinator, I should say, in the NFL. My apologies, man. I got so much going on. I'm trying to read you guys' comments and trying to see which one would be a great read. Everybody wants to know, and I've been getting, tweets and DMs all week. What do I think about Josh McDaniels as the head coach? Listen, I think that Josh McDaniels will be a better head coach this time around than he was when he was in Denver. I'm pretty sure, that he's got his ways of doing things. And, back then he was trying to be, Belichickian. I think he now understands that, hey, if I'm going to be a head coach, I got to do it my way. The guy's been around for a long time, had a lot of success with Tom Brady. No doubt, he'd be a welcome addition as far as what he can provide to, Carson Wentz or Jalen Hurts, whoever it is, or both of them, if that's what the circumstances are. And I think you might get, the double. Gerard Mayo, it's a great situation for him to go along with a Josh McDaniels and come into Philly and be able to put, his fingerprints all over a new Philadelphia Eagles defense. Just not so sure that that's going to work out. Hey, you never know. But right now, we're just trying to find out what that's going to look like. Okay, I'm going to finish up my Eagles talk. My guest is ready. He's prepared. I'm going to bring him in. You guys know him from ESPN, PTI co-host, Mr. Michael Wilbon. My brother, it is so good to see you, man. How have you been?
Yeah, thank you for having me, sir. I appreciate that. Appreciate you. Good to see you.
You got it. If you can turn your mic up a little bit, I think you might be just a little low, but
I will try to turn this up. Hopefully, I'm gonna max it out.
It's all good.
Okay, good.
So, the first 15, 20 minutes I want to devote to, Eagles talk, and then we're going to get into, the playoffs. But I was just looking over the potential Eagles hire. They've already interviewed 12 different candidates. and they've got their eye on 7 more. That's 19. Brandon Staley is off the radar, obviously, because he just got hired today by the Chargers. What in the world? What's going on with the Philadelphia Eagles? And in your opinion, what is taking them so long to just pull the trigger and pick a coach?
Seth, it's funny. I mean, that doesn't seem like a Jeff Lurie thing to be that delayed. And he's certainly not a guy who's disorganized or uncertain of himself. But the circumstance they find them in, I mean, I find it hard to believe, and you will know this better than I do, but I find it hard to believe that they even went into the last few weeks of the season thinking they were going to be looking for a head coach, right? I mean, so Doug Peterson's a couple of years removed from the Super Bowl. Things haven't gone all that well in the last couple of seasons, but to think they're going to be looking for a head coach and or starting quarterback, that just wasn't something that I think would be on their radar, even when you're planning for emergencies, with obviously senior management has to do. They have to have all kinds of things in mind in case a coach wants to bolt. You have something with a player, could be health reasons, all the things that are anticipated. I can't believe that they thought with where they were so recently, they would have to have this many. And now this is news to me. You're telling me 19 candidates, ultimately the 12 plus 7. That basically really says, okay, there's pressure within. We got to get this right. We have fallen to a level we did not expect to be this year at the end of this season. Even if you're not a playoff team, you're still not expecting to be at this level. So everything has got to be checked and double checked and triple checked, because we are now in something of an embarrassing situation. We got to get out of it.
Well, Micah, I will say this, because I just feel like as the season began to wind down, and after Doug was fired, the next day, Jeffrey Lurie had a press conference. I watched the entire press conference. I find press conferences by head coaches and owners and GMs, I find them fascinating, because a lot of people don't know what to listen for and they miss things. When I got done with that press conference, I had like 5 or 6 pages of notes, things that I thought that were important, that he was kind of giving organizational speak, but I could decipher what it is that he was saying. So in reality, to your theory that they weren't prepared, if you listen to what Jeffrey Lurie said, this isn't something that just happened just because he and Doug had a conversation and things didn't line up the way that he was thinking. He said, listen, we won the Super Bowl in 2017. We pretty much mortgaged the organization salary cap wise for the following 2 years in 18 and 19, trying to make another run while we felt like our window was open. Okay. After a 4-11-1 season, we now know that window is closed. We're in transition. We're at the transition point. What he's saying is that we're in rebuild mode. It's not like they didn't know that. They're $50-60 million over the cap. How do you go into this process, Michael, not prepared?
Well, part of that process. Okay, so the whole thing about rebuilding, yes, you have to have an idea of that, because you're talking about that stuff every day where you are as a team. But Seth, tell me if you think I'm wrong. I don't think they thought they were going through that process without Doug Peterson. And I listened to Lurie too. I don't have the same inside feeling of having been in an organization, and I don't have that. But my feeling on this is Peterson, just the notion, it crept up slowly, incrementally. And you're right, there's no one conversation, but you have those conversations. Those guys have conversations, if not daily, damn near daily, right?
Yeah.
I think, yes, okay, we're going to have to start this over, right? We're going to have to get the salary cap in order, but we're still going to do this with the guy who got us there the first time. What I have found to lacking to my satisfaction, and just listening to guys talk about this who cover the league, and I got a lot of friends living in DC most of all my adult life from Philly. I got a lot of Eagles fans, and we're on text chains. And at first I'm teasing them a little bit, but what I realize is it doesn't seem to be. I haven't heard to my satisfaction when it was that Lurie decided, okay, this isn't going to work with Peterson. We got this whole thing in place. We're going to have to get under the cap. This window has closed. But I thought Peterson was going to be riding with them. If you made me list the number of people who are on a hot seat from inside, not from looking outside, not from the media, not from fans being upset, but from ownership and general manager, the top level executives, was Doug Peterson fired? I didn't think he was. Now that last week, goodness knows, week 17, with how he handled that quarterback situation and the team situation and guys being upset in the sideline and in the locker room, yes. But then I thought, no, but he has come out and said that alone did not do it. Maybe not alone, Seth, but I think that had to be the last straw. When you have guys coming out publicly saying, what are you doing? We want to win the game. We're out here giving everything and you're screwing around. At that point, to me, that whole coaching situation gets expedited.
Well, I will say this, as far as, how that transpired, what Jeffrey said that, hey, that could have been handled better. The communication could have been better. And I felt the same way. Listen, if you want to give Nick Sudfeld some playing time, I had no problem with that. Okay. But what you should have done, the communication should have been, and I'm telling you the reason why the players were so upset, they were upset because it just came out of nowhere. They knew that there was a possibility that he could play, but when the game hung in the balance by 3 points, and then for you to make that move, then the communication should have been, hey guys, this is what I'm going to do, okay? The young guys are going to get some playing time. Jalen's going to play the first half. Nate Sudfeld's going to play the second half. Everybody's happy. There's no problems, no issues, nothing, okay? But the way that he did it, and to leave the team in limbo, wondering whether they could have won that game or not, that was the problem. Okay.
Yeah.
As far as what Jeffrey said, say it again.
In the fourth quarter, at that, I mean, you've gone that long, you've gone that far with it, and you got a shot to win this game. And yes, that has to be communicated to guys that you've been. I mean, some of those guys are wearing Super Bowl rings. They deserve that communication, which you are describing right now, at the very least. Yeah.
Listen, there's no doubt about it. But to close up on Doug, what Jeffrey, the thing that struck me was, in my opinion, I think that Doug was just as much online with this as Jeffrey was adamant about making the change. Because what Jeffrey said really struck me. He said, previously, the last 3 years, we have been in short-term to mid-term mode, meaning that our Super Bowl window's open. We're willing to give some contracts and make some trades and do some things for the opportunity to win. Okay, now we're in a transition period. We're at a transition point, okay? And understanding how hot the seat was for Doug, he basically said, if we bring Doug back next year, Doug wants to win. He's not worried about down the road. He wants to win now. So if we bring him back and he doesn't win, fans, the media, and everyone else is going to be calling for his head on the platter. Okay. Basically, he's saying we're in rebuild mode. What we're concerned with is the midterm, the long term, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. When he said that, I'm like, they're in rebuild mode. Okay. Doug Peterson can't want any part of that.
Seth, going into that last game, did you think, what was the percentage chance you would have said that Doug would not be back?
Zero.
Before, right, exactly. Zero.
Zero.
And so that part to me is, and I hear what you're saying, and I've been listening to people in Philly that are plugged in, and they're saying the same thing. You guys are in accord that Doug, that was clearly going to be rebuild, and that had not been the case before. It didn't need to be the case. You got to take a couple of shots at it, which they were going to do 18, 19. They're going to take a couple of shots. This year had to be the surprise. But even then, man, I just didn't see that coming. And then that night, fourth quarter and the next morning, I woke up the next morning wondering what's going to happen to Doug Peterson. I had not thought that going into week 17's game.
Okay, so you watched them both play. You've seen Carson at his best, and you've seen Jalen Hurts collegiately at his best, and you watched him play. It seemed like the games that he started, he always got off to a good start in the first half and then just petered out at the end, the second half. knowing what you know about the direction that they're heading, Carson Wentz or Jalen Hurts?
So it is going to entirely depend on coach to me. If there's a guy out there right now that of those, 12 guys they've already interviewed, if there's somebody, a really strong candidate, one of their top two, and he's a Carson Wentz guy, and he believes he can convince me as the owner of the team, convince upper-level management that we should go ahead with Carson Wentz, that's the condition I would go ahead with Carson Wentz. But I'm going to tell you, Seth, and this is something I've been wondering what you thought about this, because this is something that is in your wheelhouse, having played there and lived there. Can Carson Wentz find a comfort level just living and being in Philly and being in that locker room? Because to me, he sort of fractured it. He damaged himself a little bit. Not so that it's irreparable. I don't mean that. But you would know better than almost anybody whether or not Carson Wentz can exist happily, productively in that situation. And if he cannot, with a coach who comes in there wanting to have specifically him, I try to trade him. Because I still think there's enough value to get something for him. But I don't want that locker room poisoned. I don't want that atmosphere toxic when I go to training camp, even when I go to off-season camps this spring.
See, Michael, I keep hearing people talk about a divided locker room, that Jalen and Carson can't survive in the same atmosphere. See, I don't believe that. I don't believe that, because as a player, that locker room is going to follow the guy that gives them the best chance to win.
Right.
Win. Okay. Yep. Now the question is, see, I'm all about the competition, because as an 8th round draft pick, that's all I could do. I had to make it by competing. Okay. And I get it as a quarterback, they hand it to you on a silver platter, and all you got to do is mess it up or take it and run with it. So I get it. But my thing is, come back and compete. And whoever wins now, at least for this year, you're going to have to figure out a way to get them to coexist. That's called being a professional, because every Monday morning, Carson Wentz is going to pick up a check. Every Monday morning, Jalen Hurts is going to pick up a check. If it doesn't work out the way you want it to, so be it. It is what it is. It's your own doing, okay? So my thing is, you bring them both back and you make them compete. But listen, Carson, there's no denying the kid can play. He's got talent. Yep. What happened to him this year? Okay, part of it is maybe offensive line, maybe it's Doug, but Carson's got to assume some of that responsibility too. There are people in Philadelphia that, listen, the city is split. There are people that are Carson's fans, and there are people that want him gone. Okay, because they believe the reports and everything else is going on with it. Okay. The kid is talented. He had one bad year. He's had some injuries. Can he find his footing? Was this year all about, the elements around him, or was it in his mind? That's the thing that worries me the most about Carson Wentz. Because I got a picture of Jalen Hurts throwing the ball and Carson Wentz standing looking at him. If you could see the disdain on his face for the fact that for Jalen Hurts' presence. See, that to me is more of a problem than anything else. Because go ahead.
No, I got a question that plays into what you're saying right now. And luckily, I was covering a lot of NFL then, and making my way to Philly all the time from DC, because you guys have fascinating, competitive, entertaining, good teams. That locker room, the locker room you played in there, was as strong a locker room of veteran guys. Y'all didn't have people acting out and showing disdain and resentment. I thought of that as soon as you said it. Come on, man, y'all would have taken care of that in that room probably at halftime. Yeah. The coach, you wouldn't even have to wait for the coach with the leaders, including yourself, that I'm thinking of in that locker room in those years. I look at that now and I'm like, well, what is happening here? Like, who's going to take control of this? And it shouldn't even reach the coach, but it has. And now, like, who's going to come in and either want to deal with that head on if the locker room is not strong enough, or what's he going to do? He can't let Lurie do it. He can't let any other executives get involved. That's got to be coach and senior locker room presence. And I'm wondering, not being in the locker room, in the Eagles locker room these days, if they have those kind of guys like you did?
Well, hey, listen, a lot of guys have exited that locker room. You know, when you lose a guy like Malcolm Jenkins, you lose leadership. When you got a Brandon Brooks, you lose leadership. Lane Johnson, leadership. I mean, there's a lot of guys that weren't in leadership roles this year because they weren't playing or they were no longer on the roster. You know, that's another big thing when you're building a roster and you're building the team. If you're not concerned with those things, you know, then it becomes problematic. You know, and the Eagles have been trying to get Carson to step in that rightful place because it's been hard for him. You know, he comes in, starts his rookie year, second year, gets off to a blazing start. 11-2, MVP candidate. Nick Foles wins not only the Super Bowl, but the Super Bowl MVP. From that point on, the locker room is split because there are Nick Foles guys and there's Carson Wentz's guys, and a lot of guys don't want to hear what Carson Wentz has got to say because Nick is the guy. Nick is the guy that took him to the promised land. Okay, so when Carson tries to step into that role, you know, after they get rid of Nick, now it's problematic because there's still some of those guys that are there. And you know just as well as I do that locker rooms create factions. You know, and listen, if you're going to be a leader at the quarterback position, you got to be the man. You got to be a man of all the people in that locker room. If you're not, then it's hard for you to lead. And that's the problem I see with Carson Wentz is that sometimes he's not a man of the people as far as the locker room is concerned. You know, and that's going to make it that much more difficult for him to lead. And then it creates these animosities. And when you have these animosities, listen, I've seen it with Randall. There are guys in our wide receiver core when Randall was a starter that he didn't like, and he would not throw that guy the ball because they didn't get along the prior week. Now, as petty as that might seem, I've seen it with my own eyes. And you're crazy if you don't think that it doesn't still exist in today's game if you don't have the right guy behind center that's leading your football team.
And other leaders like that. So, you know, I thought of this the other day when I'm watching, obviously, the Saints game and Malcolm Jenkins. And I'm like, oh, my God, that's right. Malcolm Jenkins is not there. And so, you know, like you said, when you start moving, that you have that turnover in that room, and you may turn it over for a younger player, a player you think is more skilled. But even if you get that, you may have such a great loss of personality and leadership. Yes, you see that in every sport. And then, you know, it's interesting in football, man, I mean, with just one game and the balance of what has to happen during the week, I hear you. I don't doubt one word of what you just said about the portrayal of the locker room. But man, something to me, you know how I listened to Carson Wentz, and I wound up shaking my head saying, I don't know if he's the dude. And I feel bad because the injury got him off course. He had a great season, like he was headed there again. Another injury got him off course. But now I'm just wondering, is that room such that he can take that room and lift it up and lead it? I got my doubts.
Well, hey, listen, there's reports flying all over the place. There's reports that Doug Peterson wanted Hurts and wanted to trade Wentz, and that's part of the reason why. There's reports that Laurie, because of the money he's committed to Wentz, wants him. You know, that means that Hurts has got to go because, you know, if Wentz is uncomfortable with it, they've got to create the most comfortable of environments, which is like way beyond, you know, my comprehension of how the game even works. Because if Wentz gets Hurts again, and it's more likely that he will again in the future than he won't, don't you need a guy that's qualified? But he's willing to not, he wants that other guy out of the organization so that he doesn't have to look over his shoulder, so that he can feel comfortable. That just doesn't make sense to me from a competitive standpoint. Nor does it make sense to me from an organizational standpoint. You know, you just can't do that. You can't allow that guy to have that kind of power. Say it again.
Seth, that's one of the great ways that all sports professional sports have changed for me over the last 25 years. The things that would not have been tolerated, I'm gonna say early 1990s. Those things are all too often not only tolerated, but they become the agenda setter in today's sports world. So now you're looking at all these other factors that really, particularly the good teams you played on, even teams that weren't great, that wouldn't have been tolerated. It wouldn't have been tolerated by the senior leadership in the locker room. And now you got all these agendas with management and who's telling who. Baseball's got it. You know, the manager doesn't have the final say. The general manager's dictating it with his analytics people. I mean, it is whose team is all these things that make it such a delicate balance now in a locker room that is just really something that I know you are glad you did not have to deal with that stuff as a player.
Well, I'm glad I played in the era that I played in. You know, save the money because, I mean, these guys are making, you know, phenomenal, a king's ransom in comparison to what we made. But when I look at the game is so different. Man. I just, you know, when I look at the analytics, there's a place for all of that stuff. But I think that the game of football is being hijacked by, you know, the analytics geeks, you know, because they're making all the decisions. The numbers are making all the decisions. You're going to get to a point sooner or later where you don't even have to have a coach that, you know, that does it because the computer and everything else is going to do it because they're making all the decisions now. Look at how it's changed the game so much. You know, there was a point in time where coaches, they would never go forward on 4th and 1. I mean, it's like you're like vilified as a head coach now if you cross the 50 and you don't go for it anymore. I just don't get it. What's wrong with punting the ball and relying on your defense to do its job and play this field position game? They don't do it anymore because you know what? There's some guy up in the booth with a headset on that's in the head coach's ear that's telling him what the probabilities are and what the percentages of winning the game if you make it on 4th and 1, 4th and 2. I just, you know, I seen Andy Reid do it on Sunday. I mean, you talk about how big of cojones did he have to do what he did at the end of that game, man?
I know that was fascinating. Well, how about this, Seth? How about now a coach is consulting a probability chart on just 2-point conversions, as if simple math, gut feeling, knowing your team, knowing the offense, knowing what you practice during the week, those things go out the window because you got a probability sheet that is being dictated, just as you said. But look at baseball. You can take a guy out who is a no-hitter in the 7th inning of a World Series because that manager is all he's doing is pitch counting. He has nothing else that he can trust, even though this is his team. He's with them every day and every night. He can't trust his gut, his instinct, his eye, his professionalism, his training well enough to know what to do with that pitcher. And that's what it's every sport, man. It drives me crazy as a viewer and as someone who would get a chance to talk to coaches about why they did what they did. And guys had incredible reasons over decades as to why they did what they did. And you would just see how dedicated they were to knowing everything they could know about the team and every player on all 3 units, because those things were going to decide what he was going to do on 4th and 1 on his own side of the 50. And now probability, statistical probability. And that, man, I mean, you know what? I wonder what the Eagles are going to do about that. Not just the Eagles, but the Eagles are certainly one. Like, is the coach that they hire, is he going to be driven in that direction? Because how many old school guys are left? It can't be that many. Well,
I think in terms of where organizations are headed, because of the math and because of the analytics, I think that in a lot of ways that kind of drives who it is that, you know, these organizations feel like they want to hire, because they want people that are more analytics driven. You know, I think that's why you see a guy like, you know, I was talking about Wade Phillips in one of my comments, and why this guy doesn't have a defense coordinator's job in the NFL. It's absurd to me, because the guy has been one of the best defensive coordinators, you know, in the history of the game. And he, you know, because I get it, he's a little older, but I guarantee you he's not an analytics guy. You know, he's the type that looks at the situation, the circumstances, and he says, you know what, this is what we need to do. And because he's not an analytics guy, he doesn't have a job right now. Okay. Was it warranted for him to be fired last year from the Rams and for, you know, Joe Staley to come in? Not necessarily. Joe Staley inherited a great defense. All he had to do is not mess it up. But you got a guy like Wade Phillips, who's not a analytics guy, that's out of a job. I've seen analytics ruin a team. Look at the Seattle Seahawks. Ruin it.
Yeah.
Because I guarantee you what they were thinking. Okay, we ran the ball on first down. We're going to come back and throw it on second down because they're expecting us to run it on second down. And then we'll come back on third down and run it again. No, game over. You just threw an interception on the down that you should have been running the ball anyway. He just ripped them for 8 yards. Just give it to him on second down, and you walk away 2-time champions. That play destroyed that team. Destroyed it.
It did. And you know what? There are cases. I'll tell you this real quick story. So I was visiting with an owner and a general manager in their box. And he said, I want you to meet somebody. And the owner is not an analytics guy on his own, right? He's being pushed to it. And he introduced me to a guy he had just hired, an analytics guy, who he told me, as soon as the guy turned around on the left, very nice guy, we sat and talked for a while, he had never been in a clubhouse. He had never been in a clubhouse. So Seth, I'm looking at him and the GM who I know better, and I'm like, come on, y'all are making this up. No, never been around it, never been in it. His analytical expertise was in a vacuum. Sports was nowhere involved in it, other than hey, sports as a fan, sports is understanding the lay of the land in every sport. But in terms of the people and how they do what they do and what goes into and the emotion of the game and hadn't been in the clubhouse. And so I knew that was the day that I was just like, oh my God, this has come to a place now where I think sport is not better off. I think that sport is worse off. I think that by and large, are there people who can enhance it? Yeah. People who know how to do both. People who learn how to use these analytics with old-fashioned scouting and observation and conversation in a locker room daily. I love those people. The people who just turn it over to numbers, man, I find myself disgusted by it more often than not.
Listen, they act like analytics hasn't always been around. You know, when we use analytics, they would give us the printout on Wednesday morning. Okay, they never taught us how to read the darn thing, but you could get the obvious stuff, but the real in-depth, the real meat and potatoes of it, they never really taught you how to read it. But when I studied film, I created my own analytics while I studied. You know, and this is the problem that I have with players today is their level of study because minimized because you give them all the information.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so when I'm studying film, I'm sitting here, I'm taking notes. Okay, somebody come out and split backs of two tight ends. I know exactly what runs they like to run, how many times, what the favorite ones are, what position on the field, and what down they like to run them on. Okay, and I bank them in my mental database. So on game day, when they come out and it's 2nd and 4, okay, and they're on the plus 50, and they come out in 2 tight ends, I'm already anticipating what you're running. Okay. So those type of analytics, I've already put it in my mind. You understand? So for people to think that analytics haven't always been around, they've always been around. They've just figured out a way from the probability standpoint to take it to a whole nother level, which I think is wrong because it also, in my opinion, takes away accountability. It takes away accountability because when the numbers don't do what they say they're supposed to do, whose fault is it?
Right.
You're going to blame it on the numbers? You can't fire the numbers.
No, and they're not going to fire the numbers guy either. They're not going to fire that dude either.
Insane. Well, listen, guys, you're listening to the Seth Joyner Show. Today, my good friend Michael Wilbon is on with us. Let's transition. Listen, I think last week, playoff football was off the chain. I did not leave my seat Saturday nor Sunday for those 2 games. And now we're down to the Final Four. You got Tom Brady against Aaron Rodgers. You got the Battle of the Bay in Green Bay. Let's get into it. Tell me how you feel about that match.
One thing I'm going to say, I bet you. So you said about last week's games like I did, Seth. And I think that's because, in part, large part, they were great games. But I'm talking to someone who played at the highest level of defense in his career. And I'm a kid who grew up. My team has always been the Bears. I grew up in Chicago. You know that franchise doesn't know anything about high-level offense. It's always the appreciation of defense. And so those games, as great as the quarterbacks were, nobody had a great game. I mean, Josh Allen might have had the best game. Mahomes got knocked out. Brady certainly wasn't tearing it up. Rodgers was. But basically, that was defense. That was a defensive weekend, a throwback to when football was football to me, and the teams that I like watching. But this week, I mean, I don't know which one of those guys I would take. Tony Kornheiser and I argued about that today on our show about who we would want to take first in the matchup of the Bays. And I'll take either one. Whoever you take, I'll take the other guy. Aaron Rodgers is playing, I think, right now at as high a level as he has. But I don't know that I can separate the two. I know one thing. Tampa Bay better not be counting on having a repeat of the way they beat down the Packers in their regular season matchup. Because that'll be silly if they think they can just take anything from that game and apply it to this game in Lambeau. I think that would get Tampa Bay in trouble.
I will tell you this. These games were major defensive struggles. I try to tell people all the time, man, when you get to the playoffs, it's a whole different animal, okay? The brand for how to take Lamar Jackson apart is out there. You got to make him throw the ball, okay? So what do you get when you get into the playoffs? You get, by the time you get to the divisional round, you got the 8 best coordinators. You got the 8 best offensive and defensive coordinators. For all probability, you got the 8 best head coaches, okay? And as much as, it's a passing league and it's a quarterback-driven league and all, as much as they want to put it out there like that, when it really comes down to it, the way you saw defenses play last week, that's what it comes down to. Offenses can be dominant. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you got great defense, when I watch Tampa Bay play against New Orleans, okay, I was blown away by how dominant both defenses were, especially because Tampa's defense has been, especially their cornerbacks, they've been horrible all year long. But to be able to watch the way the defense is dictated, you got a guy like Bruce Arians that wants to just air it out all over the place. But they came into this game realizing that they couldn't do that because you know what? You can't put Tom Brady under that kind of pressure. Just as long as the game is close, you got to run the ball. Okay, so he's talking about Green Bay.
Well, that's the perfect place, Seth. It's interesting because you can tell. Look, we know Tom can coordinate his own offense, and sometimes he winds up doing it just because of what you said. Arians wants to air it out. The offensive line is fine within reason. He don't want to be back there holding the ball 3.5 and 4 seconds to let receivers clear 40 yards down the field. And when he shortened up those routes and shortened up that passing game, that's when Tampa Bay got untracked to me on Sunday because that defense he knew what that defense could do to him. He'd seen it in the second game. He knew early in that third game he was getting knocked around, even though he didn't really, I guess he got sacked once. But I'm with you on that. And the question is, in this chess match of defense, and I loved, back when I was covering football for the Washington Post, one reason I loved listening to you is because I like listening to your whole team because you had guys in there who could just talk about defense and the impact it would have and the adjustments you would make. And y'all weren't scared. Y'all weren't scared of no high-powered, high-octane offense. And that's what I loved about that team, about those teams. Same thing this week. So Green Bay is going to have to figure out, okay, Tom just wants to hold the ball 2.2 seconds or 1.8 seconds. How are we going to make him hold on to that ball long enough to get to him and disrupt him? And I'm sure the Packers, that's their whole MO. We can't let Tom Brady just shred us by patiently going down the field with these 8 and 10 and 12-yard passes. So I'm looking forward to that. And obviously Tampa's defense is figuring out, something different. But what is it? What is it we can take away from Rodgers? What is it we can take away from Aaron Rodgers that he was way too comfy with, in last week's game? And that game was tighter. Green Bay got pushed a little bit until we got late in that game. But I'm really interested to see what the Packers defense comes up with to pressure Brady, which means I guess coverage has got to be such that they make him hold on to the ball or look for deeper into his progressions so they can get to his butt and keep him from just dinking and dunking them to death.
I just think what you're going to continue to see is a patient game. You know, when I think about Tom Brady and even when I think about Aaron Rodgers, okay, I'm looking at two quarterbacks that want to run. Why do they want to run the ball? Because they realize that if they run the football, that sets up play action, bootlegs, and everything else. That alone is going to buy them extra time in the pocket when they truly want to throw the ball. Okay. The other thing is you can talk about no risk it, no biscuit with Bruce Arians. Okay. But at the end of the day, what you've got to be able to do is you've got to set up those scenarios. Tom Brady has been masterful his entire career at just taking what the defense gives, moving the chains, and trying to score every single possession. And then what does he do? He waits until you're down or you feel like you need to be pressured, and you show him blitz, single coverage on a mismatch that he knows he has, and that's when he strikes downfield. See, everyone thinks that Aaron Rodgers just throws the ball all over the map. They do the same thing. They want to move the chains. They want to possess the football, and they want to put you in the most uncomfortable position. You know, I think Kansas City is the one team that just threatens you because their offense is built around beating coverages that you're in. Everybody else, they're just patient. We're just going to patiently take what you give us. And then once we force your hand, once we make you come with blitz, and you can't fool Aaron Rodgers, you're not fooling Tom Brady. They've seen everything there is to see. Once they see that they got you where they want you because now you got to come with pressure, now they just give the little nod out there. And now they hit you downfield. And to me, that's the smart way to play.
Well, let me ask you this.
But you got everybody else in the league, they're trying to implement, we're going to throw the ball, we're going to throw it all over the map. No, that's why your quarterback is hurt. That's why your offensive line ain't any good. And that's why your wide receivers are frustrated because you're trying to force it. You know, there's a blueprint for how to do it, man.
So going into this weekend, in that game, in that Tampa Bay Green Bay game, which one of those defenses do you think is in position to have greater success against a legendary quarterback and offense?
You know, both of them, Michael, have their flaws. Tampa Bay's flaw is, you know, their cornerbacks are unpredictable. You know, they had good games last week, but both of those guys have been struggling all season long. Yeah, it's been tough. You know, the biggest plus for Tampa Bay is they got both of their starting linebackers. And listen, those two guys in the middle, those guys are stars. The problem with their line is you got one pass rusher. You know, they don't get a whole lot of pressure. So sometimes, you know, Todd Bowles has to bring pressure. When you go over to England, Green Bay, the problem with Green Bay is that you can run the football on that defense. You can really run at them if you commit to doing that. And then once you do that, now you slow down the linebackers, you slow down the thought processes of the safety. So they both have their inefficiencies, if you will. It's just a matter of who's patient enough to get it done. And by the way, listen, I know that Tampa Bay is one of the better run-stopping teams, but that trio of running backs that Green Bay has, listen, they can bring it, man. They can bring it. And to me, the key is just being able to run it, because if you run, it opens up the rest of your playbook. You can do whatever you want to do. You can run whatever you got in your playbook. But if you got to stand back there and drop back 50 times against any defense in today's NFL, you're going to have problems.
Well, Tampa certainly got two running backs, if healthy. And I don't know what Jones' situation is before Fournette and Jones. I mean, they're going to need to work both of those guys. And you're right. Sometimes, you know, he gets carried away with you know, no risk it, no biscuit. This does not seem to be the time for that, because, look, I mean, turnovers are going to be deadly, and Tom getting pressured is going to be deadly, and they're going to need to run the ball from this and commit to it. And the question is Arians going to do that, not with a halftime adjustment, but from the opening kickoff? Is he willing to play that way?
Well, I think that both of these teams are going to come out and want to establish the run. So I think you're going to see that. Unless they just come out and one team says, hey, we're just going to give you a steady diet of man coverage, you know, well now, hey, I can set my offense up, you know, to take advantage of that matchup that I feel like is the greatest matchup, you know, whether it's a slot guy or whether it's a split out guy. then you're going to take advantage of that, especially if you're dictating, personnel by, and you're able to dictate whether you're in too high or single high based upon personnel. Well, now if you can get what you want, now you can force the issue. But you look at a team like New Orleans, they were like, you know what, we can handle your run with a man box. We're going too high safety. We're not going to let you get behind us. So you know what Tom Brady said? We'll just run the ball. We'll just keep running it. We'll just keep running it until we make you go to single high, and then we'll take our shots then. But it's just going to be really interesting because I think that's going to be the biggest chess match, of the weekend. And then you jump over to Buffalo and Kansas City. The biggest question mark is Patrick Mahomes. Yeah. Is this guy going to clear protocol?
Well,
that's a big deal. And
then sounded like a few minutes ago, I was just checking the feed, Seth, to see what the latest was. It sounds like they can't clear him to play yet because he got to go through all the 5 stages. But it sounds like he's going to be able to practice in a limited way tomorrow. But even if that works, he's got this foot injury. And as we know, Patrick Mahomes' mobility is so important to his everything he does, whether it's extending plays or just, obviously he'll take off and run for first downs occasionally. But his mobility is so important. If he doesn't have that, the foot injury, I'm not going to say is more important because he's got a clear protocol, as you said, on the concussion. But I just wonder about the two. Even if he's feeling fine in terms of his head, what about that foot and his ability to sort of create this environment where he's even more unpredictable? I didn't even mention throwing on the run. So, his footwork sets up everything he does. And I just wonder how he's going to be with that. We may not know about that until Friday or Saturday or maybe game time.
Both of these games, man, are just really intriguing to me, when I sit back and I look at the dynamics of it all. You got the Kansas City offense and Mahomes, and like I said, what they want to do is they just want to create mayhem. They're trying to create stress with their routes. They're making it, they're showing a guy one thing and he bites on it, and here comes another guy to replace. Andy Reid is just really phenomenal when you think about how they coordinate this offense and how Mahomes is actually able to, to operate within it. But then again, you got Leslie Frazier over on the sideline for the Buffalo Bills, where the defense is pretty darn good. They're pretty good up front as far as, shutting down the run. And they got elite level guys on the back end of that defense and elite level linebackers, that can cause some problems. It's going to be real interesting to me because, that route that they like to show, that trips route that they were talking to, Tony Romo was talking about, where they get either Tyreek Hill or they get Travis Kelce as the number 3 and they run him clear across the field. And if you're in man, they just run away from you. If you're in zone, they set it down in a hole on the other side. How are they going to adjust to that? What adjustments can you make as you look at that? And then at the other end of the spectrum, what adjustments is Andy Reid going to make? What key breakers, now that the cat's out the bag as far as what it looks like in those situations, what changes to those routes are you going to implement so that players aren't necessarily anticipating what you're doing? I'm just so intrigued by these two games and seeing how they play out and how they coach them.
I'm glad you mentioned, two defensive coordinators you mentioned with Leslie Frazier and Todd Bowles, Seth, two guys who I know people may want to get their choices in and they may want to, make their hires as soon as they can. But if you're serious about whether it's a rebuild or particularly taking a team that's got elements and the cupboard is not bare and you got some things to work with defensively, how can you not think of giving a shot? And I think Todd Bowles is one of those guys who was in, obviously, the Jets. You're in a tough situation no matter what when we're dealing with the Jets. But a second time around, we've seen some coaches have real success, especially when they've been with bad teams and difficult organizations the first time around. But I'm hoping that Todd Bowles and Leslie Frazier are both guys who have earned, deserve, and then we're seeing them on display right now. You're talking exactly about what they're doing and adjustments they're making and how big they were and successful they were last week. And playing prominently this week, I hope those guys get real looks, real long, serious looks at head coaching positions.
Michael, I would tell you this, though. The thing that I don't like, I want these African-American coaches to get a chance. They deserve a chance. A lot of these guys deserve chances. But you want to know the thing that I'm tired of seeing?
What's that?
I'm tired of seeing African-American coaches get jobs that they're set up to fail in. Because most of the time when you see an African-American coach get a job, the team doesn't have a franchise quarterback. The team is devoid of talent, okay? Yep. And they're in salary cap hell, okay? So they get these jobs and they're tasked with turning a roster around, turning the team around, and it's a 3 to 5 year proposition. And really all they get is 2 to 3 years. And then once they get done building it up, the organization says, thank you very much, but you haven't won. It's time for us to move on. And they hand all of that work and all of that talent over to somebody else. Listen, you've seen it with Tony Dungy down in Tampa Bay. He put it together. They bring Ja Gruden in. He wins the Super Bowl, okay? You've seen it with Hugh Jackson in Cleveland. Wasn't given enough time. Look at where Cleveland is now, okay? You seen it. You might even, and you can talk about where the team is and so on and so forth with Anthony Lynn. But look at where the team is now and where the team was, okay? Now that he's got them ready to win in position with a franchise quarterback, now you fire him? So my question is, why is it the African-American coaches always get the worst jobs that they can possibly get, that they're almost set up to fail in?
Well, and certainly no patience. How about, I'll give you another one, Seth. How about Lovie Smith? What have the Bears done since Lovie Smith? Lovie Smith took them to a Super Bowl, was fired off a 10-6 season. And the Bears have had, what, 3 coaches since? 1, 2, 3, 4 coaches since? And I guess 3. And they haven't done anything. They have not improved the fortunes of the franchise, right? They wind up making all these moves to get what they think is a franchise quarterback, and it failed front office maneuvers. But Lovie Smith is the one who takes the brunt of that. Again, fired off a 10-6 season. How about Jim Caldwell? I mean, you got a couple of these coaches whose franchise haven't done jack since they left, and those guys were fired out of some great impatience to hire somebody who was going to do what? And so that irritates the hell out of me. I know it used to irritate me. I was covering the league when Tony Dungy got passed over time and time again. And I was so angry about it all the time. And it was amazing that Tony was able to maintain any semblance of patience and all of his faculties, because I know I wouldn't be that patient. And it worked for Tony. I remember Tony pulling me aside one day and saying, Mike, you are going to have an aneurysm. You cannot be this angry about it because it's not going to work. And I remember saying to Tony, you have a disposition that is so great for this. And it is so much calmer than a lot of the people looking on, seeing you being deprived, literally, of a chance. So that I hear you. I had a front row seat to that stuff, Seth, for way too long. And now that we're seeing it again, it's like, didn't we get past this already? Haven't there been enough guys who've proven, how they can coach and what they can do, that we shouldn't be having to beg for Eric Bieniemy to get a look? So not a look with a bad team, not a look with a team with no franchise quarterback, salary cap hell, as you perfectly described it. So when is that going to happen? Here we are, we're still waiting, or we're waiting again, I should say.
It's just, and as an African American coach, when the opportunity comes, you got to take it. You don't have the luxury of saying, "Well, I want that," because there's not enough here. So you wind up taking it, and I don't know if it's to your benefit or your detriment, because when you fail within 3 years, then someone else comes in and takes over. And all the hard work that you put in, all the developing of players that you put in, now someone else comes to get to reap the rewards of it. It's almost unfair. But at the other end of the spectrum, listen, you coach to be able to be one day being in that position. You know,
Yes.
I hope that Robert Saleh, you know, succeeds in New York. But is it probable when you really stop and think about it? When you think about the Jets organization, come on, man. Is it probable?
It's been bad for so long. We're talking decades long, you know, and that's exactly why, you know, I was thinking about Todd Bowles. Okay, talk about a guy who deserves a second chance. His first chance wasn't really a chance. And I'm with you on Robert Saleh. I hope that situation works, but we know it's a long shot.
No doubt. No doubt, my man. Hey, listen, we're up. Our hour is up, man. And, you know, we can talk, chat, you know, sports forever, man. I appreciate your time. I know, you know, my viewers appreciated having you on today. And I didn't know you were in Arizona, man. I didn't know that you were actually there now. But, hey, let's get together and play some golf next week. Or the next time you're in, just give me a call. Let's get out and tee it. But listen, I tell all my guests every single time, let's do it. But I tell my guests every week, Michael, that, you know, our time is our most valuable commodity, man. So, you know, from my viewers, my producer, Derek Stevenson, and Tom Schrader, I want to say thank you for giving of your time and being on the Seth Joyner show today, my friend.
Seth, listen, man, first, thank you for having me. And I need to make sure that people watching and listening understand that, you know, for years, when I was long before TV, when I was covering pro football for the Washington Post, and I was in the NFC mostly, not entirely, but so many Sundays, like I said, in that locker room, whether it was Philly, Arizona, I would camp out in front of your locker because I love the discussions. I loved hearing you explain what just happened and why it happened on Sundays. And that was our kind of graduate degree. So I owe you. I can't repay you because I appreciate all that went into being able to cover football, because a gentleman like yourself, you know, it's so funny, man. You and Michael Strahan and guys of a certain couple of football generations that I know helped me do my job. And I appreciate it more than I can tell you. So anytime you want to hit me up, I'm grateful. Thank you.
Well, thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. And make sure you don't swipe me off when I call, because I will be calling you again.
No swiping off. And golf. We're playing golf. I'm going to be out here now. We got a little rain out here right now, but by the time you roll back, we're going to have the usual sunny skies, so we'll get out and hit it.
It's all good, man. I'm looking forward to it. And we got to get Chuck out, man. I think Chuck's scared to play golf with me, man. I've been trying to get him to play with me for the last year, man. He won't play. He always got an excuse.
I know. Listen, with me too. We'll tag team and we can find. Listen, you know, if we start with steaks and cigars in somebody's backyard, we may have to start there earlier and then pull Chuck out. We'll be fine.
There you go. There you go. My friend, I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so
much. Guys, that's my show for tonight. As I always tell you guys, you be good to each other and take care of each other. But most importantly, make sure that you love each other. That's it for the Seth Joyner Show this week. I'll see you guys back here next week. If I didn't say Happy New Year last week, Happy New Year's. And I'm looking forward to these AFC, NFC championships. Thanks, guys. I'll see you guys next week. Peace.